Chapter 5. How to Look Powerful. Richard Nixon was experiencing a string of bad luck. Just weeks away from the first ever televised U.S. presidential debate against John F. Kennedy, Nixon slammed his knee on a car door and ended up in the hospital. Weeks later, he emerged 20 pounds lighter, frail, and weak with the flu. On Monday, September 26, 1960, Nixon arrived at the television studio with a low-grade fever and a bandaged knee. While emerging from the car, he banged his injured knee yet again, exacerbating the wound. Unfortunately for Nixon, things only went downhill for the rest of the evening. In fact, his performance during the debate changed the entire course of the election, and it all came down to his negative cues. The very first thing we see is both candidates seated on either side of the moderator, Howard K. Smith. Non-verbally, they couldn't look more different. First, runner's feet. Kennedy had his legs folded in a relaxed seated position. Nixon is displaying a cue called runner's feet. This is when people pull one foot back as if they're about to sprint down a track. You see runners use this as their starting position. It's a cue that signals impatience. Imagine the message you send to prospective voters if you're telegraphing that you're about to run out on them. Now we know Nixon likely was in this position because he was nursing his injured knee. But he stayed in this distracting position throughout most of the debate. The ideal condition in this situation would have been to have relaxed, planted feet pointed toward the audience. Like Kennedy. His calm seated position made him look like he was reliable, sturdy, and confident. Second, white knuckling. Kennedy held his hands calmly folded in his lap. Nixon had one hand gripping the chair arm in what looks like a fist. This is an immediate anxiety cue. At first glance, it looked like Nixon was holding onto that chair arm for dear life. That's because we white knuckle when we're highly anxious and trying to keep it together. We also clench our fists when we're angry and trying to hold it in. It's a way we can focus our internal emotions externally without changing our overall appearance too much, and it's often done unconsciously. This white knuckle cue made Nixon look both anxious and angry. Third, self-soothing. Nixon's right hand was resting on the top of his thigh. This isn't a negative cue on its own. In fact, it's positive to have your hands relaxed and visible. However, during the debate, Nixon consistently rubbed the top of his thigh in a self-soothing gesture. When nervous, we try to calm ourselves down with self-touch. We're physically telling our body that everything will be okay. We might wring our hands, rub the back of our neck, or like Nixon did, run our hands along our legs or arms. This cue was not only distracting, but also made Nixon look very nervous. You know why else we rub our hands over our thighs? When our palms are sweaty. Whether his palms were damp or not, it sure looked like he was drying his hands on his pants. Gross, and not very presidential. And all that happens in the first 1.2 seconds before the candidates spoke a single word. Fourth, gaze direction. Then, 2 seconds in, before the debate even started, things got worse. Nixon made a huge nonverbal mistake. He looked over to his right. Doesn't sound like a big deal, right? From a nonverbal perspective, this was the kiss of charisma death. Remember how important gaze is for trust and attention? When Nixon looked away from the camera and us, we immediately lost trust. But even more damaging, when Nixon looked over to the right, it makes us want to look where he is looking, and that's straight at Kennedy. Nixon was basically telling us nonverbally, "Don't look at me, look at my opponent." And he held this pose for 11 seconds. He then continuously bounced between the cameras, Kennedy, the moderator, and reporters in the audience for the duration of the debate. At the time, Nixon had the nickname Tricky Dick, so his shifty gaze unintentionally reinforced his shifty reputation. Kennedy, on the other hand, stared directly into the cameras. Fifth, expressing contempt. At one point, moderator Smith introduced Nixon and a close shot zoomed in on his face. We see a number of quick cues. First, a jerky head motion. Nixon shifted his head from side to side and then up and down in a nod. Then he flashed a microexpression of contempt, a one-sided mouth raise. This negative cue signals disdain, scorn, and pessimism. Then the camera panned to Kennedy. Kennedy stared straight ahead, kept his face calm, and gave a single, slow, affirmative nod toward the audience. The difference between the two men could not have been starker. Over the next 58 minutes, Kennedy looked more and more like a winner. Calm, confident, secure, everything you'd want in a leader. And Nixon encoded cue after cue that undermined his credibility. Before this debate, Nixon was consistently polling well, but his debate performance changed the course of the entire election. Nixon learned from his mistake, fixed his cues, and went on to perform exceptionally well in the remaining debates. But it didn't matter. That one night still cost him the election. 6 weeks later, Kennedy won the popular vote 49.7% to 49.5%. Studies revealed that more than half of all voters had been influenced by the debates, and 6% stated that the debates alone were the sole deciding factors. Nixon wasn't a bad candidate. He just had a bad night of cue signaling. In his memoir, Nixon later admitted, "I should have remembered that a picture is worth 1,000 words." Both of these men were powerful, but only one looked powerful. What can we learn from the Nixon-Kennedy debate? The look of power.